I really hope this looks sophisticated enough. Hello everyone, today is kind of a different video and I really wanted to do something that actually interests me, and we're going to talk about this book that I recently read. It's called The Gene, An Intimate History by this Indian author. I cannot pronounce his name, so I'm not going to try to. So let's get into it. I bought this book when I was in Prague with my friends, and this was a year and a half ago, and I finally got around to reading it this year. It definitely changed my perspective on how do genes influence your destiny. To begin with, the concept of genes has existed long before people were actually aware of what genes were exactly made of. So the first indications of the existence of a gene, although not under this specific name, date back up to ancient Greece and actually Aristotle, because he was the first one to have the idea that there must be some unit of hereditary information. It occurred to him that children resemble their parents in terms of physical appearance. He did not call it a gene, but he recognized the existence of some form of information that was transferred across generations. So after the description of the ideas that Aristotle had, the book went up to describe different viewpoints of the people at that time, which included the idea that the hereditary information was originating only from the father, and the mother was just a vessel, and the seed of the father was just implanted into her, and she had no contribution to this child apart from carrying it for 9 months. And another idea that was actually a lot more bizarre was that the determination of the sex of a child was basically a result of whether the sperm came from the left or right testicle of the man, and if it came from the left or from the right, I don't remember. It was destined for it to be a boy or a girl respectively, and then it went and fertilized an egg which came from the left or right ovary respectively, and that's how the sex of a child was determined, which was honestly very interesting but also very bizarre. At a later point in the book, the history of the discoveries of Mendel is described, and I'm pretty sure that you've heard of Mendel in biology class. He is this monk that had previously failed all of his exams, which is quite inspiring considering the importance of the findings that he made later on. So he became a monk, and then he started investigating this idea of hereditary information and went on to grow peas and also examine how their traits were then transferred across different generations of peas. Maybe you had these tasks in biology class with, like, you know, the dominant allele and the recessive allele and the peas, and how if the peas had this and this allele, depending on whether it was dominant or recessive, the next generation of peas would be looking like this in terms of size of the pea or the leaves or like the texture and so on. After some more pages that sound like a history lesson, it comes to the discovery of what the DNA actually looked like, and how they discovered the fact that DNA comes in a double-stranded form. So the double helix, you know, like the two spirals that are intertwined. I actually saw this reel a while ago that was claiming that the woman that was working on this project, that her work was basically stolen by her male co-workers. However, I did not get that vibe from the book. She also got credit for the findings, and they were all working together. So it was not the same situation as with other female researchers, such as the case with Heidi Lamar. If you're not familiar with it, you can go and watch Bailey Sarian's podcast on that, because she had a huge contribution to the discovery of how radio waves could be used for communications during the Second World War. But when she gave the idea at first, the men were just like, nah, like this is a woman speaking, so we're not going to really to even take into account this idea, and later on some guys actually tried it and then took credit for the finding, although she was the one who proposed it. The rest of the book covers the development of the different technologies that are used in experiments involving genes. It goes into depth about how people started using this knowledge to investigate whether they could determine how genetic diseases are transferred across generations, and some very important findings were made, such as the discovery of the gene that is responsible for breast cancer. And also, I personally didn't know this, that schizophrenia is actually a genetic disease and that there is a specific gene for it, and if you possess this gene, then you have a much higher chance of developing schizophrenia by a certain age, and that it's actually transferred across generations. Although some genes have a higher impact in terms of chance and percentage, what is the probability that you're going to develop a disease, it is still only a chance. There is like not 100% guarantee that you're going to develop a certain disease by a certain age. And then the book really started diving into one of the topics that is still being very much investigated today, which is epigenetics. What epigenetics investigates is the impact that the environment has, both psychologically and physically, on the genes of a person. And although the genetic sequence itself cannot be altered in terms of the base sequence, because a gene is made of bases like guanine, cytosine, thymine, and adenine, no base can be then extracted or replaced with another one. However, what the outside factors can do is impact how these genes are expressed and how do their functions manifest. And what can also happen is the turning off and on of those genes through certain functional groups being attached to the gene. One of the most popular ways that they used to investigate those impacts were the twin studies that so many researchers like to make, and this included mainly identical twins, so twins that came from a single fertilized egg, because they share 100% of the same genetic material. Then they're being followed throughout their whole life to see what would one twin turn out to be like and what the other twin would turn out to be like. There were also some studies on twins that were separated at birth, which sort of excluded the socio-economic factors and like the environment that the children were raised in. Of course, after knowing that the environment has an impact on the way that the functions of the genes manifest, the question arises on what kinds of things really impact the gene expression. And I'm going to link a study down below, but both diet, like specific bioactive compounds, and physical exercise can have some kind of influence of the way your genes are expressed, and therefore lower the risk for the development of certain diseases or cancers even. For instance, in the study that I'm going to link down below, different bioactive compounds are listed, which have been investigated for their influence on the expression of certain genes and the development of certain cancers, such as colorectal cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, and also other ones. One of those compounds were omega-3 fatty acids for the development of colorectal cancer, different polyphenols, such as one that I mentioned in a previous video about metabolism, the EGCG, the one that was from green tea, is found to have also some impact on the gene expression and therefore lowering the risk of certain cancers. One of the mechanisms that polyphenols, such as EGCG for example, could have an impact on the gene expression overall could be through their antioxidative effects. So when you hear the word antioxidants, what they do is that they lower oxidative stress and inflammation in your body. And both of those things are really bad for the environment in your body overall. These compounds then neutralize the oxidative stress. Exercise does this as well, and therefore regulates the gene expression of these very important genes that are responsible for the increase or decrease in chance for development of certain diseases. So if I had to summarize everything that I said in the last minute in one sentence, it would be that you cannot erase what you were born with, but you can influence its impact, either decrease or increase it. There are also some interesting stories in this book that are not related to disease, but I just found it really interesting. I would have not found out about any of this if it was not for the book. So there was one study in 1993 about the identification of a gene that would code for homosexuality. They called it just the gay gene. I found it just a funny term. And it was not motivated by any homophobic tendencies, which is what have been my first suggestion. The person that started this whole thing was actually gay himself. He was a gay researcher and he was bored. That's what I got from the chapter. So he started investigating like family trees of homosexual couples and figured out that there were more gay uncles and generally gay family members always on the mother's side of the homosexual pair. Therefore, it had to be always transmitted through the mother's line. And the gene that would code for homosexuality lies on the X chromosome, because a son always inherits their X chromosome from their mother. These studies were not verified by the studies that followed. However, it's just an interesting story. This also brings me to the topic of how these studies are generally made. They actually investigate data of thousands of humans and their genetic sequences and the diseases that they have, or like traits, personality traits, physical traits, and they try to make some correlations. And this is how all of the information is gathered. This is also the reason why it is not possible yet to really have genetically engineered babies. In the last chapters, this is very discussed in depth, and what I got from it was that its technology is there to do that, but the knowledge is not there yet. So a huge study has to be done. There was like a study design for that. It requires a lot of data, a lot of computer power to do that, just to investigate which part of the gene, like, because one gene could be coding for multiple things and multiple genes could also be coding for one thing. So it's not that straightforward, like this gene codes for blonde hair and this gene codes for a higher IQ and this gene codes for, I don't know, long limbs. It's really not that simple. They have very little knowledge of this, and the only way to get that knowledge right now is through human studies, which does not come into question because of the moral aspects of it, because they have the technology to insert some type of gene that they believe to be coding for something into an embryo, but it's not okay. Like, it's not socially acceptable to do that. It's not humane. It's essentially a human experiment and you don't know what the child will turn out to be like. A very recent study was done in China with 70 embryos that were taken, I think, from an in vitro clinic. They were chosen to be embryos that would have not fully developed anyways, so that's how they justify this study. And then they used these embryos for experiment. They justified it with their culture in a way, because if the embryo had not exceeded this amount of weeks, then it was okay to do that, basically. And so that would have not been the case in the US, for example, or in Europe. So somebody is going to do these studies for sure. The question is only who. The morals are the main thing that's standing in the way of genetically engineering humans. I kind of went off topic, but moral of the story is that although your parents didn't have the option to genetically engineer you, and you probably won't have the option to genetically engineer your children yet, you can still sort of modify your genes and change your destiny. Everything is in your hands. I also forgot to mention that I'm going to leave a link down below also on the twin study designs if somebody is interested in that and how these studies are generally done and what is being investigated. I found it very interesting. Thanks to everyone for watching this video, and I'm going to see you next time.